Radio. This is Pet Life Radio. Let's talk pets.
Welcome to the Whisker Report, a new podcast where we teach you, pet product businesses and animal rescues, how to do PR yourself. Hello, everyone. I'm Reitan, one of the hosts of the Whisker Report. And joining me is my colleague across the pond, Alexandre Ricard. Bonjour, Alexandre.
Bonjour tout le monde. We're so excited about the show today. We've got an amazing guest, Maria Reitan of Topsail Strategies, which is a public relations firm based in New Hampshire. And we also want to introduce you to our producer, Mark Winter of Pet Life Radio, who is the man who gets us to you every week. How are you, Mark?
Hi everyone. How you doing? Getting ready for the weekend.
Yay! Yeah, the 4th of July. Lots of stuff going on here in the U.S. Alex, you have Bastille Day coming up, right?
Bastille Day?
Bastille Day.
Yes, isn't that the French
Yeah, it is.
Independence Day or something on July 14th?
You call it the Still Day? Oh, we call it the Revolution Day.
Oh.
The Day of Revolution.
I was taught Bastille Day.
Yeah, I heard that too. Bastille Day.
Yeah, it has many names, but Still Day, I never heard of it. But yeah, we have it coming up in 10 days. Yeah.
All right. Well, you learn something new every day, whether or not it's related to PR or not. So we are so excited to have Maria on. She was actually my boss when I was in television news, and she has the scoop on everything regarding TV. So we're going to talk to her right after this break.
Here's Daryl Michelson, owner of Furniture Cat Furniture.
Back in 1990, I was in the market for some cat furniture. And as looking at the cat furniture available, I realized that most of it is basically overpriced junk. The big difference between our furniture and other cat furniture is the fact that we use plywood, and all other cat furniture is made with some sort of a particle board.
You can see the furniture difference online at Furniture.com. That's Purrniture.
Let's Talk Pets on PetLifeRadio.com.
Well, Maria Reitan is a longtime friend and a longtime former journalism news manager. And we want to introduce her now. Maria, we are so honored to have you on our podcast. And can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Oh my gosh, I'm so thrilled to be on with you ladies today. And of course, Mark. It's good to be back on a podcast. So I had my own podcast for 15 years. So it's a little weird being on this side of the mic, I'll be honest. But yes, Mary, you already talked a little bit about my background. I spent 15 years in television news, running newsrooms all over the country. You can hear probably a Southern accent. So I am from North Carolina, and I was at stations in both Carolinas. Then I went to Miami. Then I went to Chicago. And from Chicago, I went to Louisville, Kentucky as a news director before ending my career in news at WCCO-TV in Minneapolis, St. Paul. I made the leap into PR and advertising with a national PR and advertising firm here in the Twin Cities, and was there for a decade, which seems like eons after being in TV news, which rotates every 2 to 4 years. I feel like you have to hop from market to market in order to grow your career. I know you're very familiar with that, Mary. And it was at WCCO that I made the brilliant choice of hiring Mary Tan and never regretted that. And then after spending 10 years at Carmichael Lynch, I went to a boutique firm as president and chief strategy officer and realized, I really could do that myself. And so I launched Topsail Strategies 9 years ago. We celebrate 10 years next year, and I focus on public relations, but I also operate as a small firm with in the paid, owned, shared, and earned spaces, which means I work with clients on social and also on advertising. So that's the quick version.
Wow.
Maria, can I ask what drove you to PR? Like from news? That's quite like a big change.
Oh, Alex, great question. So I did not want to be an alcoholic and divorced before 40. And I gave myself into age 40 to get the heck out of Dodge because I had seen so many career news directors, especially, become chained to that career because you make a certain amount of money. You feel like you cannot do anything else. You have no idea what else you could ever do but be in news. And you are forced to move every 2 to 4 years from city to city. It's a very nomadic lifestyle. It's very hard on relationships and it's very difficult to have a family. And I've always planned my career very thoughtfully. And when I was in Louisville, Kentucky as a news director, I told my husband after having moved him, I think 5 times. By then we had an 18-month-old daughter. And I said, you know what? I do not want to be doing this and moving her when she's, in elementary school and she has to readjust. So we have one more move left and we need to be near family. We had never been near family. So that needed to be back to Charlotte, North Carolina, Atlanta, which is a great market, or the Twin Cities. So I took the Twin Cities job because it did open first and it's a fabulous place to raise children. It's got one of the best public school systems in the United States. And it's a very outdoorsy, healthy community. And I knew it'd be a great place to raise a family. So when the position opened, I jumped at it, but I promised my husband I would not move him and I would get out of news within 5 years. Because again, I did not want to be an alcoholic or divorced. So, and you think I am joking, but it's the truth. So many news directors are divorced. So that's what I did. Instead of being 5 years, it was 2 years because the situation that I was hired into changed pretty dramatically. I worked for a very large ownership group at the time. They owned a bunch of CBS stations all across the country. And the gentleman who hired me in New York left and he was replaced by another man who we did not see exactly eye to eye. And I realized that I needed to make that leap sooner rather than later. And it took me a year, Alex, to decide what I wanted to do and if I could do anything after news. And I talked to 200 people across that year. And I determined that an agency would be the best fit for me because it's fast-paced and news is extremely fast-paced. I did not want to be bored. And I felt like I could make an immediate impact with the skills I already had in me. And so that's why I made the choice. I have since developed a coaching business called Jump Team, where I help people make career pivots and are able to see the possibilities of transferring the skills they have today into a new career and not do it in a year and 200 people, but do it in a matter of months. So anyway, long answer to your short question, but that's the why and the how.
So I have a question for you. I happen to know about the time you spent at WCCO. You went through the ringer there. There were so many challenges and the pressures that these corporations put on newsrooms to deliver a profit. Can you tell us how that affects news decision making and the kinds of stories that you had your reporters and producers run?
Absolutely. I think what most people don't understand if they're not in news is that news is a business. At the end of the day, you have to make a profit. And the way that profits are made is that you create your own content. So if you look at across the 24-hour spectrum on any given day, you have news and then you have programming, right? It's expensive to purchase programming that's not developed by your own network. So oftentimes what happens is more news product is generated. Well, what was happening is more news product was generated with not more people added to the news team to fill the hole, we called it, the news hole on any given day. And yet you had to deliver eyeballs, people in the 18 to 55 demographic, which was the creme de la creme people that you wanted watching your newscast. And you had to have a lot of them watching day in and day out. And every day we would get a report that showed us how many people watched every one of our newscasts. And not only how many of them watched, but when they bailed out of the newscast. So you would know what content was resonating, what content was not. And then you had to develop more of the content that was resonating, right? So you leaned into that content that seemed to be more sticky than the content that wasn't. However, you had to do it with fewer people in a more of a news hole. So what that meant was you were doing what I call, if it bleeds, it leads type of news. In order to cover news of the day, it's a quick in and out. You send a crew, they scattershot the story, they come back, they put it on the air, it repeats at noon, 5, 6, 10, maybe the following morning, right? It becomes much more of an investment to have someone come off the street, not cover news of the day, but spend 2 months doing an investigative work that then turns around and it runs, instead of maybe a minute 25, like a bleed it leads, it runs 3 to 5 minutes. And that's where real news happens, unfortunately. But that's an investment of time and money and people to do that kind of journalism. It's expensive. And if you have fewer people to cover that bigger news hole, that growing news hole, and what you're finding is that your viewers maybe aren't sticking around to watch that 3 to 5 minute investigative piece. They're watching what happened in the first block of the show, which is the news of the day, and then they're out. Then what do you think's going to get covered, right? You're going to do more what I call cheap and easy coverage. And the other thing that is challenging is you're only as good as your last newscast. So when you're getting those overnights, and that's what they were at the time, you get up the next day and you would see how you performed the previous day. If you didn't perform well, you had to go in and explain to your station manager why you didn't perform well. And then you had to try to fix that day. And you had to watch for trends in viewership to try to fix things over a certain time horizon. And there were particular months of the year that were hypercritical for you to perform well. February, May, and November is what's called sweeps months. And that's when you are putting on your most amazing coverage. Those 3 to 5 minute pieces you're promoting, they're sexy, they're interesting, and you hope that really, kind of jumpstarts your numbers. You live and died by especially May and November sweeps. And if you did not have a good sweeps month, forget it. Because what happened was sales would always price their commercial signing that they were selling by your sweeps month. And if you did not do well, they could not sell the news for as much as they wanted. If they could not sell the news for as much as they wanted, guess what? I was told I had to lay off people, or I had to fire people, or I had to find a way to make up that income. So that's the way it works, people. And it is super stressful. And so, you laughed before about divorced and alcoholic, but you might see where people could maybe turn to the bottle.
Yes.
Right? Super stressful. And it's only gotten worse. And I won't go down that rabbit hole unless you want me to, but I'll shut up now. But that's your quick primer on news as business.
I actually have a question, because you could see all the viewership and, how well your content was doing. Do you have any experience with pet content? Do you remember if the pet content was doing really good, or did it depend on the story? But, because our listeners are mostly in the pet industry, so I was wondering if you had any insights on that.
Oh, Alex, yes. So I used to say, if I could put people, pets, and weather in a story, it was a home run. So if it were bad weather, people always tuned in for bad weather. So, I would pray for the bad weather days, right? And if it were anything to do with a pet, then that was always big, or animals in general. And then children. Children were always big as well. And I'm going to give you a little story that I swear people in Chicago thought I was insane. I know they thought I was insane, but I was coming from Chicago. I was at WMAQ as managing editor, which meant that I was in charge of what the reporters covered in Chicago at that station. And I had just been there a few days, and I forget who was in town. It might have been the president in town. And it was the 5 o'clock show. And at the time on the 5 o'clock show, or was it the 4 o'clock show? I can't remember, but mainly women were watching. Okay. You had to understand who your target audience was. And I didn't think that women gave two you-know-whats about the president being in town when there wasn't really a lot to talk about. And yet we had a puppy mill story that was breaking. And I told them that we needed to lead with the puppy mill story because people cared more about dogs than they did the president. I think we won that show.
Oh, wow.
But Chicago's a big journalism town. And of course, they thought we would lead with the president. I think they hated me from that day forward. I was not popular in Chicago because I pushed back on their preconceived notion of what was news. But I really was leaning into what I thought the viewer cared about, not what we thought we should cover. Remember, this is a business. And we would get to the president. It wasn't like we were not covering the presidency, but I was more interested in that puppy mill story. So anyway, if that tells you anything, about the value and the interest in pets specifically.
Yeah. And I've heard, so I'm based here in the Minneapolis area as well. And I had heard from some of the stations that their viewership increases by 20% when they air any kind of an animal story.
I believe that.
So that kind of ties in. So how would you suggest to animal rescues and for-profit pet companies, how would you suggest that they pitch to TV stations? Is there any kind of some tidbits of advice you can give?
Absolutely. Well, one, I would say hire Whisker Media. That's what I would say. You silly people. If you haven't already become a client of Whisker Media, you should do that first. And then Marian and Alex will know exactly how to pitch your product. But should you not do that for some bizarre reason, then I'm going to say that what you need to think about is, what does your product deliver? What's the impact that it makes? What's the end result that makes your clients' lives or their pets' lives better, safer, more healthy? What are you doing that's unique, different, never before seen, or affects a ton of people? That's what news cares about. They care about the unique, the different, the new, the impact, the high number of people that it has the ability to help. And if you can prove that demonstrative difference, that is going to be a key. The other thing that I always say is, it is typically a product, and that can feel very salesy, very advertising. And there's a natural inclination not to cover that in news. So I always look for a way to tether that to a macro trend, something that is trending, that is having a moment in news, that is time locked. For example, I know July 4th just happened. There's all kinds of products out there to help calm and quiet pets who are, fearful of fireworks and big noises. So if there's a holiday or a seasonality to the product or a trend that you can tie your product to, you have a better chance of getting coverage as well. If you've got someone who's a third-party expert who's very well known or very, very credible, I'm not talking about some B or C, D level celebrity, but they authentically can bring value coming alongside your product, they become an endorser of the product, and they can add legitimacy just by the very nature of who they are and the expertise that they bring. And I always look for that. If you're an NGO, you're a nonprofit rather than a product manufacturer, obviously you have a mission, and you need to lean into that mission, and you need to tie that mission to that bigger story. So if you're cat rescue, for example, why are you in the cat rescue business? Why are there a lot of cats to rescue? Are you having a hard time finding homes? What's your challenge? What's your pain point? And being able to talk about that so that the station knows that there's a problem that maybe their coverage could help solve. So, you lean into your mission, you lean into your pain points, and perhaps how the listener, viewer, reader could help if they only knew about it. That's part of what a news station is there to do, is to help solve problems. So those would be my recommendation.
I have another quick question about, we're in the political season, which we call the silly season. And that's an important time for TV stations, right? Right, with their revenue.
Yes, it's hugely, hugely important. Tons of money flows into a TV station during election year. And I would always, it's the good and the bad. You get an infusion of a lot of money, but the problem is the next year, when there's not an election, you have to make that amount or more. So you have to find ways to continue to increase your revenue, your ad revenue, even though it's a non-election year. So let's say millions of dollars come in this year. I would have had to make the same amount and preferably more next year with no political spending. And so it is hard to attain that kind of growth without this infusion of dollars. So it's the good and the bad that comes with an election year. The other thing is election coverage, the advertising bumps off legitimate advertisers. Not that I'm calling political advertising not illegitimate, take that as you will. However, that means that it can replace Whisker Media client ads, for example. And so you're being bombarded by political ads. And so you've got regular businesses who can get bumped by that, which is also not great.
Wow. Well, you know what? We're going to take a quick break. This is a fascinating conversation, and we'll be back with Maria in just a little bit.
Take a bite out of your competition. Advertise your business with an ad in Pet Life Radio podcasts and radio shows. There is no other pet-related media that is as large and reaches more pet parents and pet lovers than Pet Life Radio. With over 7 million monthly listeners, Pet Life Radio podcasts are available on all major podcast platforms. And our live radio stream goes out to over 250 million subscribers on iHeartRadio, Odyssey, TuneIn, and other streaming apps. For more information on how you can advertise on the #1 pet podcast and radio network, visit PetLifeRadio.com/advertise today.
Let's talk pets.
Let's talk pets
On Pet Life Radio.
Pet Life Radio.
PetLifeRadio.com.
And we're back with Maria, and I've got one more question, Maria. So you've talked a lot about the bad aspects of working in the news, but do you have any good aspects?
Well, Alex, let's say challenging aspects, okay? Not necessarily bad, just challenging the reality of working in news. There's so many wonderful things about working in news. One, I was drawn to news because I was a truth teller. I always said, I wanted to take the man down. I wanted to give, the little man a voice. That's why I really went into news. And I will say that newsrooms can do so many good things if they're focused on the right stories and are really committed to seeking out the truth, ferreting out what's really happening, bringing truth to the light. There's many wonderful things that can happen. There's a lot of really good journalism that still happens today. It's really exciting to have a front seat on history. I was there for a lot of really tragic things that happened and saw a lot of things and learned a lot of things that never, ever, ever made it onto the news, the news product. This will date me terribly, but I can remember watching the white Bronco from above in real time with O.J. Simpson in the car. And I was in news when that was coming down. I know where I was when that happened. And then I was at Fox in Miami, and we covered the whole trial all day long, every single day, live with our own attorney and our own facilitator. It was fascinating. I was there when Andrew Cunanan, who was a serial killer, was caught trapped on a Miami Beach boat. That was amazing. Sad, but amazing. I can tell you where I was on 9/11. I was in a newsroom, and I know exactly what I did. And I was very proud of my news team. We were the first to be in New York. We were the first to be in, I think it was Pennsylvania, when that other plane went down. We were there that night. I sent those crews out the door. That team thought I was insane, but I got them out and I got them on site, and the network used my people because they didn't have their own people in place. So, there are really, really amazing things that I was on the front seat to watch and participate in. And at the end of the day, I like to think that my team's news coverage helped inform our viewers in a way that perhaps they wouldn't have been informed or wouldn't have their own front seat to history had those crews not been able to do what they needed to do on those really big days. So, I'm an adrenaline junkie. I had determined, I had the most time when I was a producer and I could be in the control room in the booth calling the shots. That was what I really, really loved to do. But I only spent maybe less than half of my career doing that. The rest of it was hiring and firing and creating teams and making choices on content, which is not as fun. So, yeah. But yeah, lots of really, really fun times. And the people I met, I will say hands down, amazing people, hardworking people, and for the most part, attracted to journalism for all the right reasons, at least back when I was in news.
And I have to totally agree with everything you just said. And I want people to know too, like, you see anchors and reporters on air, but I'm going to tell you, and Maria, you chime in, these are not the decision makers. It's people behind the scenes like you and the producers who are really calling the shots. And so I just want to bring up one thing. I've experimented really pitching producers rather than the on-air people. What do you think about that?
Well, I never pitch on-air people ever for that reason. And not that I'm not dissing on-air people, but that's not their role. Their role is not to decide what goes on the news. Their role is to make what is created for that newscast really come alive with their delivery and their ability to zig and zag as the product changes on the air in real time, and to ask good questions. That's their role. The role of a news director is to set the agenda for the day. What are we going to cover? How are we going to cover it? How are we going to be different? How are we going to lead into our mission as a news station? And then deploy that to the producers who make that come alive by creating their 30-minute to an hour newscast and determining what that lineup looks like, that lineup of stories. And then writing a lot of it with their team. And then making sure that what comes back from a reporter is up to snuff. And if it's not, telling that reporter to go back and work on those stories to make them better. So I always pitch assignment desk editors. And the reason I pitch assignment desk editors is they're the ones that are deploying the crews to cover the stories. And they keep what's called a day book. And in that day book are all the possible stories that could happen. And they get a lot of those story ideas from people like us in PR who send in news releases, or they send pitches and say, hey, this is happening today, or here's a great story I think you should consider. So I always send it to the general newsroom email. I send it to the assignment editor, and I send it to the show producer. Because at the end of the day, the show producer will ultimately decide if it makes it into that story lineup or not, that show lineup. So I try to create relationships with those show producers. In very small markets, anchors can be also producers. So I'm not saying I would never pitch an anchor, but 9 times out of 10, they're not going to make the difference. Sometimes a reporter, if they have a beat. So in the case of pets, if you could find a lifestyle reporter or a consumer reporter, someone who covers consumer topics, they're few and far between these days because beats are subject matter experts that, frankly, newsrooms can no longer really afford to only do stories on their expertise. But if you can find them, they're great people to pitch because they are naturally going to understand the value of that story to themselves and their viewers and their readers. So those are the people that I pitch on a regular basis.
I have one final question to you. You run Topsail Strategies, but you also do some work with Whisker Media. So we want to give a shout out to Topsail Strategies. Tell us a little bit about it and what you focus on and what you like to do best.
Oh, thank you guys. I'll keep it short. So I love helping companies set strategy at the end of the day. What is it that you're trying to achieve from a business standpoint? What does success look like? And really working with the folks there at Whisker Media to help that strategy of how do we make that happen? What are the tools in the toolbox that we can deploy to make sure that your end goals are realized? So through that strategy, one tool might be PR, one tool may be paid media, one tool may be influencers, one tool may be social media, one tool may be events, sampling, promotion. There's a whole bunch of tools in the toolbox, but which ones do we deploy? And I love working at that level. And then, coming alongside great people, Mary, like you and Alex, to, supplement wherever I can. You two are great professionals. So, where can I lend a hand and help diversify the offering on any given day to any given client? But yes, based on my experience, having worked at a large advertising and PR firm, I know about integrated marketing and integrated campaigns. So I've done large advertising campaigns, which is something that, I can bring to the table as well.
Absolutely. You've worked with some of the top Fortune 500 companies out there. And you were responsible for a lot of work with the Subaru campaign, which everybody knows, the love campaign.
Well, the Subaru campaign, I didn't work on it specifically, but it was work done at the agency. And that firm still has that brand, that client. And that work is groundbreaking. They've won so many awards for that work, and deservingly so. Yeah, I wish I could say that I had a hand in that. I did not, but I definitely was there when we won the business. And of course, they've had it for years and years and years because they keep innovating, and that's the key.
That's so awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I know you are in between moves. You just moved from Minnesota to New Hampshire, and you are going to be like Alex and be a resident of the world soon.
Yay! Yes, I am. Yay, Alex. I'll see you in France.
Yay!
All right. Well, thank you so much. And we're so excited to be doing this for all of you out there who are making life better for animals. And got a question you want us to answer, or Maria, reach out to us on Instagram or Facebook under the Whisker Report, and we'll try to answer it in the future. And as we always say,
bark loud and purr smart.
Bye.
Let's Talk Pets, every week on demand, only on PetLifeRadio.com.